number 4 of Tension Knot series of AME Productions. Today, as we know, we will be dealing with evolution, and in that evolution we are going to take interesting theories by Darwin and Lamarck. But before we start, as usual, we are going to sing a small sweet prayer.
है मालिक तेरे बंदे हम, ऐसे हो हमारे करम, नेकी पर चले और बदी से टले, ताकि हंसते हुए निकले दम।
चले और बदी से टले, ताकि हंसते हुए निकले दम।
So let us start with Darwin's theory. Darwin, the great scientist, he went on observing different living beings of his era, and he came to certain conclusions. Those conclusions are called as the principles of Darwin's theory. The first conclusion that he drew after seeing many specimens of living beings was overproduction. Now, Darwin stated in this principle that all living beings have a great reproductive potential for giving rise to new offspring. That means they can reproduce, go on reproducing, and they will be giving rise to many young ones. But it has been observed that in spite of having overproduction, the number of that species remains the same or almost constant at least. Why is it so? He went on thinking. And then he came up with the second principle called as competition. He said that all living beings, they are showing competition, either intraspecific or interspecific. Now, intraspecific competition means competition within a species. And interspecific competition means competition between different species. Now, intra and inter are a bit confusing, isn't it? But let me tell you one trick to remember. We say international. International means several nations are involved. So here also in interspecific competition, several species are involved. And what is the competition for? The competition is for food, water and shelter. Here we can give the example of leopards from National Park and people living near Array Colony. Now leopards in National Park, their life is affected because we are cutting down the jungle or forest. And poor things, they have to come to the human civilization for food, water and shelter. So competition for getting food, water and shelter is there between leopards and human beings, and that goes under interspecific competition. Now let us come on intraspecific. Intraspecific means within the same species. Now all human beings, even at young age of yours, you are undergoing intraspecific competition unknowingly. It is a cutthroat competition. Because you want to get good marks, there is competition. Because you want to get good jobs, there is competition. And ultimately it boils down to one fact, that this competition between the living beings of the same species like us is again for food, water, shelter, and this time there is one more addition, and that is mate of our choice. Struggle for survival. So this is one more principle of Darwin's theory. There is always struggle for survival. हमको जीना है तो स्ट्रगल करना पड़ेगा. जीना है तो कितनी भी भीड़ हो, हमको लोकल से जाना पड़ेगा. That is called as struggle for survival or struggle for existence. Now, due to these two factors, competition and struggle for survival, they are acting as control over overproduction, and that is why the number of living beings in a given species remains almost constant in spite of overproduction. Now we come to the next principle of Darwin. Here he said that there is heredity. Heredity factor is always there, and that is why we are inheriting certain traits from our parents. But at the same time, he acknowledges that we are not exact replicas of our parents. The siblings are not exact replicas of each other. Why is it so? Because he said there are variations. Variations means differences. See how he went on thinking, and I really appreciate the way in which he has presented the principles. After heredity and variations, he said that differences arise in the next generation. Unfortunately, at that time, He wasn't knowing anything about mutations. So he couldn't give the cause of differences or cause of variations. But he stated, just by observing living beings, that in spite of heredity, there are variations also. Then he went ahead. He said that in a given situation, if the variations are useful to that animal or that living being, then that living being will survive. Otherwise, if the variation is not useful in a given situation, then that living being is going to perish. And he called it as law of natural selection. Or the law of natural selection is also called as survival of the fittest. Now, for explaining the law of natural selection or the survival of the fittest, he gave the example of giraffe, what he thought about giraffe, that he has described in a very interesting manner. Let us see. He said that in the beginning there was a lot of grass on the ground. And there were few trees. He said that ancestors of today's giraffe, they were actually animals with short limbs and animals with short neck. So here we go. I am going to represent two giraffes. My drawing is horrible, but I know that you will like it because it will make your concepts clear. This is one giraffe with short legs and short neck. This was the ancestor of our today giraffe. So here I am going to show you few giraffes like this. Short neck, short legs. These were ancestors. Now he said that the environment suddenly changed. All the grass disappeared due to dry spell. So the grass disappeared. And in this group of giraffe, suddenly, the reason he couldn't explain at that time, he said suddenly, a very tall giraffe with long neck and long legs came into existence. Why? He couldn't explain. But he said that's what must have happened at that time. And this giraffe with long neck and long legs could reach the foliage, that is leaves of the tree, and it could eat the foliage of the tree. So at that time, in changed circumstances, these giraffes were not getting any food because all the grass had disappeared and they couldn't get leaves from tall trees. But the giraffes, which had appeared suddenly in that population with long neck and long legs, they could reach the leaves on the tall tree. So they survived. But these short ones, they perished one by one. Now it happened that all short neck and short leg giraffes had died. Only few giraffes with very long neck and very long legs could survive, and they showed reproduction among themselves. So the next principle he said that because of selection, that is natural selection through ages, plus reproductive isolation, went on and on for millions of years, and ultimately a new species of giraffe was born. So look here, these types of giraffes could not mate with short giraffes because they had perished. Now what remained on the earth was only giraffes with long neck and long legs. So this is called as reproductive isolation. And this went on for years together, and ultimately new species arrived on this earth. Interesting, isn't it? So students, now let us take two more questions on Darwin's theory. Demerits of Darwin's theory and merits of Darwin's theory. First take demerits, kharab points. Now let us see. Darwin explained law of natural selection very well. He stated survival of the fittest. जो कोई फिट होगा वो ही जिंदगी में जी सकेगा. That is survival of the fittest. But he could not explain arrival of the fittest because he had no knowledge about mutations at that time. Darwin's theory also cannot explain useful and useless modifications. It couldn't explain slow and abrupt changes taking place in living organism. Why such slow and abrupt changes can occur, that he couldn't explain. He couldn't explain presence of vestigial organs either. Means vestigial organ हमारे शरीर में है, उसका मतलब क्या है, वो क्यों अभी तक है, यह डार्विन couldn't explain. Moreover, natural selection is not the only factor for evolution. Remember, mutations play a great role in evolution, and Darwin never thought about mutation. So these are the demerits. Now let us come on the merits. अच्छे points उसमें क्या है? See, law of natural selection or survival of the fittest, everyone agrees that yes, it is there in the nature. Nature will select the fittest and only that fittest living being will survive. Everyone universally accepted truth जिसको बोलते हैं ना, that is law of natural selection. So it is considered as a milestone in the evolutionary history. Now second one, when you take into consideration Darwin's natural selection plus the rise mutational theory plus Morgan's work, a new theory has developed, and that is called as New Darwinism or Neo-Darwinism. Now students, we have covered the Darwin's theory, and now we require a musical break, isn't it? So let's have our musical break. Now students, let us cover another theory of evolution called as Lamarck's theory or Lamarckism. Now to understand this theory, we will have to see the principles of Lamarckism first. Lamarck said that the evolution is due to activity or laziness of a living being. If a particular living being is using a particular organ very often and to a great extent, then that organ develops. But if the organism is lazy in using a particular organ, then that organ degenerates. So the next one is use or disuse of the organ. If activity is there, that means the organism is using a particular organ to a great extent. If laziness is there, then the living being, that particular living being, disuses or not uses a particular organ. Then what happens? Lamarck said that due to this, if lot of use is done, then that organ develops. And if a particular organ is not used or disused, then that organ degenerates. Due to this, there are external changes in the organism's body. That is, its morphology changes. Now, changes in the external characteristics of an organism due to use or disuse of a particular organ, he called it as acquired character. Now, acquired character in simple language it means जीवन काल में हमारी हैबिटों से जो एक्सटर्नल चेंजेस हम में आते हैं, all those are termed as acquired characters. Now suppose if during very young age, if we give a child lot of exercise for growing in height and height of that child increases, then the tallness there is the acquired character. Now we go on the next principle. Lamarck said that these acquired characters are inherited. Means whatever external changes one gets in his or her body due to use or disuse of his or her organs, they are passed on to the next generation. So inheritance of acquired characters, he called it as ancestry of acquired characters. And lastly, he said, just because the acquired characters are passed on to the next generation, external morphology in the next generation has also changed, and that brings evolution after a long span of time. So students, right from here, we will find that one thing leads to another. एक्टिविटी है इसलिए यूज बढ़ता है, ऑर्गन का यूज, एंड यूज बढ़ता है इसलिए that organ develops, and because of that external changes are taking place. These he called as acquired characters. He stated that acquired characters will be passed on to the next generation, and that he called as ancestry of acquired characters. And lastly he said that because of the inheritance of acquired characters, ultimately evolution takes place. Now let us see the examples given by him for giving explanation for all these principles. Now, activity means leads to usage of that organ for a long time and very often used, and that develops that organ. This we understand by seeing the examples in our daily life. For example, our all Hindi heroes, they have got six-pack body. How do they develop it? Due to exercise on day-to-day basis. But do you mean to say that just because that Hindi hero has got six-pack muscles, this character, this acquired character will be passed on to his son? Oh no, the son will again have to slog hard for developing his own six-pack muscles. So ये तो ठीक है कि activity leads to use of that organ and it develops that organ. Another example which he gave for this development of the organ was of giraffe. Now let us see what he says about present day giraffe. For that I will have to rub off this much part. Again, a small picture to show how the giraffe developed its long neck and long neck according to Lamarck. He said that in the beginning there was grass. इतना तो उसका डार्विनिज्म के अनुकूल है. He said that a group of giraffe was living in this grass, but they were having short neck and short legs also. Then he said that somehow this grass started disappearing and there were shrubs and trees in that area. Shrubs means medium-sized plants. And trees. Which were quite tall. Now when the grass started disappearing, first of all, the ancient giraffe tried to reach the foliage of the shrubs, medium-sized plants. So he stretched and stretched his neck. He stretched and stretched its legs. And we get intermediate-sized giraffe which were showing this character. Slightly long neck and quite long legs because the grass had disappeared and the giraffe was stretching its neck. So the giraffe, ancient giraffe, was making an effort to reach the foliage of the shrubs. But now what happened? The shrubs also disappeared due to dry spell. So here the shrubs are also disappearing. Now the food, that is the foliage of the leaves, was only present on top of the tall trees. And the effort to reach this tree went on and on. Stretching went on and on. So here we find that stretching has continued. Stretching of neck as well as stretching of legs has continued. Giraffe is making great efforts to reach the foliage because ultimately the food factor is going to decide whether the giraffe is going to survive or not. And this stretching of neck and stretching of legs went on for generations together. And ultimately, Lamarck said that present day giraffe with a very long neck and very long legs have appeared on the earth. Now students, let us see another example taken by Lamarck to explain his theory. He said that animals like swan and duck. Means Hamsa and Badak in Marathi. They were terrestrial in the beginning. Means they were land animals living on land. But due to changed circumstances, they had to enter the aquatic region, that is lakes, pond. They had to enter to find food because food on land had diminished. Once they entered the pond or lake, they had to swim. Otherwise, they would have perished. So, their limbs were turned into oars. Flap-like portions appeared, and these limbs were used for swimming in water. So, presence of oar-like limbs in swan and duck, Lamarck said that this is an acquired character, and further he went ahead that this acquired character is passed on to next generation. Then he gave, at that time, there were no gyms, no exercise maybe, and Hindi heroes were not there. But locksmiths, blacksmiths, means लोहार काम करणारे किंवा कुलपांचं काम करणारे, they have to go on hammering on iron, and this hammering action, hatodyaची action, built up their shoulder muscles. So you will find that they have got, such people have got very good strong muscles in the shoulder. This example was cited by our Lamarck for explaining his theory. So up till now everything was going on fine. Everyone said yes, use of organs will develop them and disuse will reduce or degenerate the organs. Now what were the examples given by Lamarck to show that disuse or not using a particular organ leads to degeneration? Two famous examples. He took the example of ostrich and emu bird. Now these are huge birds. शहामृगाच्या जातीचे birds आहेत ते. And these birds, they run very fast. They have got powerful leg muscles. But they cannot fly because they have disused their wings. No use of wings. That is why their wings have become degenerated or functionless. And that is why huge birds like ostrich and emu cannot fly. That is what our Lamarck had stated. One more example of disuse of organ, and that is of legs in reptile. We know that the example of reptile is all snakes. Lamarck stated that ancestrals of snakes, they had legs, but due to changed environment, they had to burrow inside soil. And for burrowing, you know, legs and hands are useless, not of any use. They wanted a sleek body, ekdam narrow sleek body, and that is why they disused their legs. Disuse led to degeneration of their legs, and that is why we find reptiles like snakes, they do not have legs. इधर तक तो लैमार्क सही दिशा में था. All these principles were acceptable because he had given the examples from day-to-day life and explained them really very well. But then he said that these acquired characters are inherited. Is it possible? No, suppose I go on practicing how to sing and I develop good voice. Then that is my acquired character because इस जन्म में मैंने अच्छा voice पाया. But can I give guarantee that my offsprings will be good singers? No. So acquired characters are not inherited, and from here his theory flopped. So इसमें merit क्या है? Use और disuse तक सबने accept किया है. Acquired character होते हैं, that is also accepted universally. But demerit में क्या है? In demerit, we will have to show that these acquired characters are not inherited. So आधा सच है और आधा झूठ है. So Lamarckism is not accepted fully, but still his efforts have to be appreciated. So now students, we have seen what efforts did scientists Darwin and Lamarck have taken to explain the evolution. Don't you feel that their photos have to go on our wall of fame? Yes, isn't it? So let us see the two photographs of Darwin and Lamarck. Now students, we will be dealing with one question called as speciation. Now speciation word comes from species. We know that Darwin had introduced Origin of Species in his book having the same title, that is Origin of Species. And in that Origin of Species book, he had mentioned that species means a group of organisms having external and internal characteristic features same. So morphology, as well as anatomy, अगर सेम है तो according to Darwin, they formed a species, right? And he said that when old species during the course of evolution gives rise to new species, then that is called as speciation. So these were the definitions according to Darwin and the scientists belonging to that era. After Darwin's period, lot of inventions were made. Research went on, and now according to new scientific definition of species, species is equal to a group of organisms which can produce fertile offsprings by natural reproduction. So while deciding whether a new species is born or not, these two criteria have to be applied. They have to produce fertile offsprings, means त्यांच्या बेबींना सुद्धा पुढच्या जनरेशन्स निर्माण करता यायला हव्यात. And this process, fertile offspring, should be produced by natural reproduction. Artificial means of reproduction जर करायला लागणार असतील तर ते न्यू स्पीसीज मध्ये येणार नाही. So these two conditions have to be fulfilled. Number 1 condition and number 2 condition. We know that Darwin said from old species during course of evolution new species are formed. And this process Darwin and contemporary scientists called as speciation. But according to new definition, all species during evolution undergo genetic variations. उनका जीन्स बदल जाता है by say mutations or by any other such method. Genetic variation, and they also show geographical and reproductive isolation and changes to produce new species, and this is called as speciation according to new definition. So basics of Darwin's are maintained, but these things are added because now we know about genes, we know about mutations, and we know that isolation, reproductive and geographical, will be combining with mutations and other changes to form new species. So students, we have come to the end of Darwin's and Lamarck's theory. Now, what about the next episode? Our plan is to take evolution of human in the next episode, that is episode number 5. Till then, you have to take care of yourself because you are the apple of our eyes. So, see you in the next episode, that is episode number 5.
चल के तुझे मैं लेके चलूं एक ऐसे गगन के तले जहां गम भी न हो आंसू भी न हो बस प्यार ही प्यार फले एक ऐसे गगन के तले